The knife struck true, drawing more ichor, but the tyrannid lashed back with a sweep of its tail. The impact caught me across the legs and hurled me into the sand. I rolled instinctively, narrowly evading the killing strike that followed. Its talon punched into the ground where my chest had been a heartbeat earlier. I slashed at the exposed limb, opening a wound that pulsed with alien fluids. The tyrannid recoiled, and I used the moment to regain my footing. The crowd was howling now, half cheers, half jeers. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught orcs trading teeth like coins, betting on which moment I'd die. My survival had become a gambling proposition. In any other place, the thought might have been amusing. The fight dragged on, minutes that felt like hours, a brutal dance of attack and counterattack. Neither of us landed a killing blow. It was stronger, faster, born for war. But I had training, intelligence, and experience hunting its kind. I knew its patterns, its weaknesses, yet attrition favored the xenos. Even weakened by captivity, its regeneration far outstripped my endurance. Each exchange left me slower, more battered, while the tyrannid remained tireless, driven by instincts older than humanity. A misstep. Fatigue dulled my reflexes, and a slashing talon ripped a deep gash from my shoulder to my elbow. Pain flared white-hot as my blood splashed the sand. The crowd roared, thrilled by the sight of human blood. I staggered back, trying to buy space, but the tyrannid sensed it. Weakness, the scent of a kill. My knife, though sharp and steady, was never meant to fell a beast like this. My back struck something solid, a pillar at the arena's edge. No retreat left. The tyrannid advanced slowly, savoring the kill in whatever alien way its kind could. I tightened my grip on the blade. If this was the end, I would make it costly. Then I saw it, half buried in the sand near my boot. The unmistakable shape of a frag grenade, dropped by some poor soul before me, or perhaps placed deliberately as part of the spectacle. Either way, it was my only chance. I lunged for it as the tyrannid charged. My fingers closed around cold metal just as talons raked across my back, tearing through my jacket and flesh. I rolled with the impact, came up in a crouch, grenade in my bloody hand. The tyrannid turned for another charge. Timing was everything. Too soon, and it would evade. Too late, and I'd die before throwing it. It leapt, a perfect arc of predatory violence aimed to impale me. I primed the grenade, ducked under its trajectory, and as it passed overhead, jammed the explosive into a gap in its carapace, where old wounds exposed its inner flesh. The blast was instant. The tyrannid's body absorbed most of the explosion, but the shock wave hurled me across the sand. My ears rang. My vision blurred. Through the haze, I saw its ruined form twitching, ichor pooling beneath its shattered armor, limbs spasming in death throes. For a heartbeat, the arena fell silent. The orcs stared, as if unable to process what had just happened. Then the sound came, an eruption unlike any I'd heard before. Not mere cheers or excitement, but something like reverence. A human, armed with nothing but a knife, had killed a tyrannid warrior. It was the kind of impossible victory the orcish mind adored. I forced myself upright, swaying from exhaustion and blood loss. My uniform hung in tatters, soaked crimson. But I stood, knife still in hand, and turned to face the war boss's platform with all the dignity I could muster. Grizguts himself seemed stunned into silence, his bionic eye whirring as it struggled to focus on me. Then suddenly, he threw back his massive head and roared with laughter, a sound like artillery fire shaking the arena. "Commissar, man, full of surprises!" he bellowed when the echoing mirth finally subsided. "Grizguts like surprises, makes life interesting. You live today, fight again soon. Maybe something even better next time." His words sealed my fate. The same guards who had marched me into the pit hauled me back out, though their handling was different now. Rough as ever, yes, but beneath it, a hint of respect, as though I had become something more than just another human captive. Instead of being dumped back in my cage, I was taken to the medics. Grotto was waiting, his bulbous eyes gleaming with glee at the state of my wounds. The pain boy practically salivated over the talon gash carved across my back. "Good wounds," he declared, applying some burning concoction that seared like fire. "Clean cuts heal good with right medicine. Make good scars. Scars important. Show survival." I endured his ministrations in silence, too drained to resist. When he had finished stitching and binding the wounds, I was given water and a meal of noticeably higher quality than the prisoner's usual slop. Protein-rich meat of dubious origin and a dense fungal bread that was disturbingly almost pleasant. The message was obvious. I had become an investment, a spectacle worth preserving. By the time I was returned to the main chamber, word of my victory had already spread. Faces turned to follow me, some wide-eyed with awe, others calculating. A human had killed a tyrannid in single combat. In this strange, brutal hierarchy that elevated me to a position just beneath the orcs themselves. Varen greeted me with visible relief. Thorn only nodded, a faint satisfaction in his eyes. "The arena champion returns," he said. His tone carried no mockery, despite the grandiose title. "You've achieved what few ever have, Commissar, the respect of the orcs." Respect? I sank to the floor of the cage, every muscle burning in protest. Is that what this is? Fighting xenos abominations for their amusement? In orc culture, yes, Thorn replied calmly. Combat is their creed, their art, their science. By surviving and by fighting well, you've earned a place in their mythology. I want no place in their mythology. The words escaped me bitterly, though even as I spoke them, I knew they were hollow. What I wanted had ceased to matter the moment I was captured. There was only what was and what might be. Nevertheless, you have it, Thorn pressed, and with it comes privilege, better food, medical care, perhaps even limited freedoms. These can be leveraged, Commissar, for survival or for something more. The unspoken word lingered between us. Escape. Dangerous even to whisper, yet suddenly more tangible than it had ever seemed. My new status could open cracks in the fortress of orc control. But at what cost? Each concession, fighting for their sport, enduring their crude medicine, consuming their food, eroded something of who I was. How much of Jorven Kryl, Commissar of the Imperium, could be stripped away before nothing remained but an empty shell performing in the orcs' theater of cruelty? The days that followed formed a new routine. I was fed, given water that was nearly clean, allowed the luxury of washing off the worst of the grime. Grotto checked my wounds, which healed surprisingly well despite his barbaric methods. And each day I was taken to a training ground to hone the body they now valued as a weapon. It was there that I saw her again, the woman with the mechanical arm I had glimpsed during my first escort through the prison. Up close there was no mistaking her. Cadian. The unmistakable violet eyes of her bloodline confirmed it. The mechanical arm was cruddier than I'd first thought. A painful-looking patchwork of scavenged pistons and snapped gears that whirred and clicked when she moved. "Commissar Kryl," she greeted, her voice steady despite the obvious hardships written into every line of her face. "Your reputation precedes you, the Tyrannid Slayer, they call you now." "And you are?" I asked, keeping up my exercises, careful not to show too much interest. "Major Arara Ven, 89th Cadian," she answered, jerking her mechanical arm to indicate the compound around us. "Or I was, before this. Now I'm just another performer in the pit." "How long?" 6 months, give or take. Time blurs." She watched my form with the hard eye of someone who'd lived and died by movement. "You favor your right side," she observed. "In the arena, tells like that get you killed." I corrected my stance. The critique was blunt, but true. "Survived 6 months," I said. She let a ghost of a smile cross her face. "Skill, luck, and the willingness to become whatever's necessary to survive. Orcs like novelty. Predictability bores them. Kill the entertainment, and they find a new sport. We began to train together after that, swapping techniques, trading small innovations born of necessity. She had faced almost everything the orcs could throw into the pit. Other prisoners, hired xenos, even the feral squigs the greenskins turned loose when they were bored. Our sessions were always under guard, observed but rarely interrupted. Conversation became cover for gathering maps and habits. We spoke of guard rotations, weapon caches, the compound's layout, little details folded into casual remarks that, collected over days, became a map. Both of us were always preparing, though neither of us said the word aloud. Ven knew the place. It had been an Imperial outpost, an old shuttle bay and storage complex turned arena and feeding pit after the invasion. Her elevated status as a favored fighter bought her a degree of mobility and the knowledge that came with it. Where the weapons were stored, which gates were weak, even the quirks of Grisguts himself. "He's smarter than most of his kind," she told me in a low voice one afternoon. "Keeps certain prisoners alive for more than sport. Interrogates officers, learns what he can. He studies tactics, adapts them, makes him dangerous." The thought chilled me. An orc war boss who learned and planned could threaten more than the usual greenkin rabble. If such intelligence could be gotten out, Imperial command would tear the world apart to act on it. The idea of escape shifted, sharpened. It was no longer simply about getting free. It became duty again, a thread of the commissar ID bin before capture tugging at me. That thought steadied something inside. Weeks slid by, training, healing, listening. I fought twice more in the arena, once against a captured contract mercenary, once against 2 other prisoners punished for some minor offense. I survived both, but not without cost. New scars joined the old, and the weight of killing fellow humans in the name of survival sat heavy on me. All the while, the plan crystallized. Not a desperate scramble, but an organized strike. An answer to the war boss, a message that humans were not merely sport. Major Viven and I sketched the outline. Others, cautious but hungry for anything better than chains, were slowly brought into confidence. Those few orcs we did encounter were dealt with swiftly and silently, their bodies dragged into shadows to delay discovery. The security control room lay dangerously close to Grisguts's command center, a risk we could not avoid. Without it, there would be no freeing the prisoners, no chance of reaching Imperial command. We advanced cautiously, listening for signs of life. 2 guards stood outside the reinforced door, alert, disciplined, and visibly sober. Not the usual rabble. These were trusted lieutenants, chosen for reliability. They would not fall to simple tricks. Major Ven gestured with quick hand signals. She would draw their attention. I would circle behind. I nodded, slipping into the jagged alcoves of the corridor for cover. She stepped into view, carrying herself with the casual confidence of an arena fighter heading to training. The guards immediately leveled their shooters. "Not supposed to be here," one growled, gesturing toward the arena with his weapon. "I was summoned," Ven replied smoothly. "War boss wants information on my next fight. Something special for the end of the festival." The pair hesitated. Plausible. Grisguts did occasionally summon champions for his twisted amusements. That heartbeat of uncertainty was all I required. I emerged from the shadows and fired both sluggers at point-blank range. Even orc resilience fails against twin shots to the base of the skull. They collapsed before either could shout an alarm. We dragged the corpses aside and forced open the door. Inside, silence. Fortune again. The room was empty. Just as Thorn had described, the chamber was a hybrid of Imperial design and crude orc graftwork, sacred circuits desecrated with scrap and glyphs. Ven took up position at the door while I approached the console. The override sequence came back to me as if etched into bone, numbers and words drilled into every Imperial servant for emergencies. I entered the code Thorn had given me. The system hummed to life, orc glyphs flickering into proper Imperial script. Relief surged through me. I triggered the cell block release. Across the compound, locks disengaged with mechanical clatters, doors grinding open. At the same time, I activated the emergency beacon. A standard distress call now pulsed into the void. Whether anyone was listening was another matter. This world had been written off years ago, its survivors presumed lost. The klaxons erupted at once, not because we'd been spotted, but because Imperial systems did not suffer unauthorized access quietly. The element of stealth was gone, but chaos could serve us. "Time to move," Ven said sharply. "The cells are opening. We need to arm as many as possible before the orcs rally." Guided by the facility schematics now glowing on my data slate, we slipped into the tide of confusion. Orcs were running in every direction, some toward battle stations, others toward the arena, others to the cells. None spared us more than a glance, assuming we were just more bodies in the storm. The armory loomed ahead. Guards were posted, but their focus was outward, expecting an assault from without, not from within. We struck fast. 2 bodies fell. Silence followed. Inside, we found the prize: racks of captured Imperial weapons, lasguns, autoguns, crates of ammunition, even heavier arms, flamers, meltas, enough to turn captives into soldiers again. Prisoners were already filtering into the corridors, uncertain but emboldened by the open gates. The first group to reach us included Varen and Thorn, shocked faces, but determined ones. "Commissar," Thorn breathed, as if he had doubted he'd ever speak the word again. Thorn lent his expertise, once a tech priest, now a half-broken scholar of machines, plus knowledge of the old outpost's systems. We even had a reluctant ally among the prisoners, a trustee who bought limited freedom as an orc translator. The opportunity arrived with the Wa Festival, the Greenskins' bacchanalia of fungus beer and ritual blood sport. Security thinned as many guards celebrated. Those left were sluggish and careless. It was the best bad chance we would get. The plan was simple on paper and fiendishly complex in practice. Major Ven and I, as arena fighters, had access to the training yard and its practice weapons. During our scheduled session, we'd overwhelm the reduced guard detail, take their arms and keys, and move through the compound to free as many prisoners as we could. Thorn, with his old knowledge, believed he could reawaken parts of the Imperial security grid, seal corridors, maybe bring gates down, perhaps even send a distress pulse if anything Imperial still listened. Success was far from certain. An alarm would bring a wave of orcs quickly. Failure meant death, continued degradation, or the slow erasure of whatever I still was. The appointed day arrived with the hard inevitability of plans too long practiced. I woke oddly calm, the pre-battle clarity settling like armor around my mind. My wounds had knit well enough, strength had returned. I was as ready as I would ever be. When the guards fetched me for training, I saw the signs at once, fewer in number, movements heavy from drink, attention frayed. A good omen, if omens were currency here. Major Ven was already at the yard, moving through drills with her mechanical arm, which Grotto had recently tuned for finer motion. She nodded once. No words needed. We began the warm-up ritual, circling, sparring, the guards watching with bored disinterest. Slowly we worked toward the weapons rack. Practice blades. Blunted, weakened. Not meant to kill, but enough to create an opening. The signal we chose was innocuous, impossible to explain away. "The Emperor's mercy comes in many forms," I murmured as our blades crossed. Ven's nod was a fraction of a degree, and we moved. I threw my practice blade, not to wound, but to distract. As the nearest guard raised an arm to block, I closed the distance, driving my knee into the gap beneath his crude armor. He doubled. With clasped hands, I struck the base of his skull, the guard folding like bad timber. Across the yard, Ven's metal fist connected with the second guard's jaw, a brutal, efficient blow that shattered tusk and bone. She followed with a flurry, precise, targeted, born of experience with orc anatomy. In moments, both were down. We stripped them quickly, shooters and sluggers, keys and clamps. The weapons were crude but functional. The keys were the real prize. Time narrowed. The bodies would be found at the next check, if not sooner. We moved in a low, urgent sweep. "Security control first," Ven whispered, testing a shooter's feed. "Then the cells." I agreed. We kept to shadow and wall, the corridors mercifully thin. Most orcs were in the arena, drunk on wa. The compound had become a map in our heads. Weak gates, lazy sentries, choke points to hold long enough for Thorn to work. Every step carried the weight of a dozen lives. Every breath might be the last quiet one we took before the alarms screamed. Varen met me with a voice thick as sand. "We thought you died in the pit." "Nearly," I replied, handing him a laser gun from the armory stack. "Seems the Emperor had other plans." Thorn took a weapon too, turning it over with the careful hands of a medic inspecting a scalpel's edge. "Haven't fired one in years," he murmured, "but the memory's there. More prisoners trickled in. We issued arms and quick instructions. Not all would fight. Some were broken, some too wounded, some whose will had been ground down to dust. But many wanted the chance to die with a weapon in hand instead of as a spectacle." As the armory emptied, Major Vin and I readied for the next stage. The primary objective remained escape. Get as many survivors to the surface as possible, and pray the distress beacon pulled an Imperial vessel within range. I kept another purpose close to my chest. Grizguts, the war boss who'd turned humans into sport, who'd stripped names and dignity as if they were trinkets, had to die. Beyond intelligence value, beyond tactics, it was personal. I wanted the light gone from his bionic eye. "You're planning to go after him," Ven said, reading my face without effort. "It's suicide." "I know." I met her steady gaze. "Get the others out. If I make it, I'll follow. If not, make sure what we learned here reaches command. The way they organize, their leaders' tactics, Imperial command must know." She studied me, then gave a single sharp nod. "For the Emperor. For humanity," I said. The words landed differently than they used to. Perhaps the truth had shifted, or perhaps the meaning had grown harder and purer in captivity. I cut away from the route to the surface and went deeper, toward the arena where Grisguts presided over the Wa festival. The farther I moved, the thicker the fighting grew. Orcs were coalescing under their captains. The drunk chaos had hardened into disciplined violence. I rationed ammunition like a miser, each shot calculated, each breath measured. When I reached the arena, it was a maelstrom. Orcs tore at escapees and one another with equal ferocity. In the center, towering above the carnage, stood Grizguts, bellowing, his power claw spitting blue arcs that chewed through anything that faltered. I found the observation platform, the same vantage from which he'd once watched me bleed. Fitting, I thought. Now our places would be reversed. I waited for the opening, the single beat when a beast of that size might be vulnerable. A movement to my left saved me the patience. Grotto, the pain boy, surged up the catwalk with a surgical saw raised. I fired without thinking. The lasbolt hit him in the chest. He staggered, grinned a metallic smile, and lunged. Orcs can take more than a human. He kept coming until my second shot finally put him down, green blood steaming on the metal deck. The shots gave me away. Grizguts' bionic eye whirred, snapping to my position. A grin split his face like thunder. He raised his claw, a crooked salute or an invitation, I couldn't tell. "Commissar man!" he roared, voice cutting through the chaos. "Come down and fight proper. Show Grizguts if you still remember how to be soldier, not just arena pet." The taunt pierced in ways he could not have meant to. It hit old doubts ID carried since capture, questions about what ID been forced to become, and whether any remnant of the commissar I'd been remained at all. Had I become what I loathed, a performer in their theater of cruelty? Was I still a commissar in anything but name? Only one question could answer that. I descended into the sand, weapon-trained on Grizguts, though I knew from bitter experience that even multiple direct hits rarely stopped an orc of his bulk unless they found a vital seam. We circled in the center of the arena, the same ring where I had faced so many opponents, but this time my purpose was not spectacle. It was vengeance, justice, the faint hope of redemption. "Why you run, Commissar Man?" Grizguts rumbled, his tone almost conversational amid the chaos. "You good fighter. Could be legend in the pit." "I am not an animal to be caged," I said, voice steady over the muzzle of my gun. "Not entertainment for xenos. I am an Imperial commissar." He laughed, a grinding, joyous sound. "You more than commissar now. You survivor fighter. You learn what's important, not fancy titles or speeches. Just live for next fight." There was a perverse logic in his words, the brutal arithmetic I had been forced to accept in captivity. Stripped of uniforms and rhetoric, survival was the first law. But it was not the only law worth living by. "There are things worth dying for," I said. "Principles that matter more than survival." "Dying easy," Grizguts sneered, shrugging dismissively. "Living with principles, hard. Arena teach you that. How much of your commissar talk you throw away to live one more day?" The question echoed like a challenge through my ribs, the tally of compromises I'd made, the part of Yorvin Kryl that might already be gone. And yet, facing the architect of so much cruelty, something inside me hardened. I had changed. I had adapted. But the core remained, the human part that couldn't be ground into orc meat. "Enough talk," I said, raising my weapon. "Finish this as warriors." He roared and charged, Power Claw leading in a blur far faster than his size warranted. I fired, shots hammered into armor, flashing impact but failing to stop his advance. At the last instant, I dove aside and felt the blast of displaced air as the claw missed my head by inches. Rolling up, I refocused on the only target I could hope to blind. His bionic eye. A fortunate shot shattered it into sparks and shards. Grizguts howled, enraged and hurting. His swings became furious and unsteady, but no less lethal. I circled, counting rounds, every shot precious. The opening came when his momentum carried him too far on a swing and his back exposed itself to the sand. I closed the distance without hesitation, pressed my weapon's muzzle to the base of his skull, and emptied the remaining magazine in a sustained burst. Even a war boss could not shrug off concentrated damage to a vital point. Grizguts staggered, collapsed to his knees, then slumped face first into the blood-darkened sand. I stood over him, shaking, gun still trained on the inert bulk, until the absence of movement told me he was truly finished. Around us, the battle shifted. Armed prisoners, newly organized, were pushing the orcs back. Leaderless, the greenskins fractured into furious individual combat rather than coordinated ranks. The tide had turned. Major Venn materialized at my side, blood-splattered but alive. She looked down at the dead war boss and allowed herself a hard, narrow smile. "Evac's going," she reported. "Distress beacon picked up. An Imperial patrol in the neighboring system. Extraction inbound." "Casualties?" I asked, the officer in me asserting itself even amid the noise. "Significant," she said, "but less than we feared. The confusion helped. Many prisoners reached surface armories and secured more weapons. For a moment, I simply listened to the roar of battle reconfigure into something like order. Shouts, the staccato bark of laser guns, the grinding retreat of orc ranks. I had paid a price already, and the cost would not stop at my own scars. Still, standing there with the dead war boss at my feet, a terrible, necessary part of the debt had been settled. I nodded, the weight of exhaustion settling over me like a leaden cloak. The fury and adrenaline of battle ebbed, leaving only the ache of captivity, of suffering endured, of survival purchased at too high a cost. "It is over, then," I murmured. Major Ven's eyes cut to me, sharp as ever. This engagement, yes, but the war continues. The Imperium will need officers who understand the enemy, how they think, how they fight. The implication was clear: return to duty. Resume the mantle of commissar. Rejoin the endless war that had always defined life in the Imperium. Once, I would have accepted without question. Yet hesitation coiled inside me. The man who had been dragged into the arena was not the same man who now walked free. I had seen too much, endured too much. Could I simply step back into my former role as if nothing had changed? "You are thinking you cannot go back," Ven said quietly, as though plucking the thought from my skull. "And you are right. You cannot. But perhaps you can become something more useful, more effective, because of what you've endured." Her words followed me as we marched toward the extraction point. Around us, freed prisoners stumbled forward in disbelief, still clutching their weapons as though afraid release would be snatched away. Imperial Navy armsmen had secured a perimeter on the blasted surface, shepherding the survivors into waiting shuttles. I saw Varen helping Thorn aboard, the old medic moving stiffly but upright, dignity intact. They had survived, as had I, scarred, changed, but alive. That survival carried purpose. It had to. When the shuttle punched free of the atmosphere, I felt relief so profound it was almost pain. Below, the Orc prison shrank to nothing, another ruin on another forgotten world. Yet its shadow would remain, carried inside each of us, a transformation both terrible and indelible. I thought of the feeding pits, of the moment I had refused to kill for amusement. At the time, it had seemed a small defiance. Now I saw it for what it was, the first step back from the abyss, a reclamation of humanity in the face of degradation. Aboard the Navy vessel, debriefing was brisk, impersonal. The officer recorded my account with the practiced detachment of one who had heard too many such stories. To him, I was data, intelligence to be mined. "Your insights on the war boss's tactical flexibility are useful," he noted. "Unusual organization for orcs. We will adapt our deployments accordingly." "There is more," I said. "The human element. What captivity does to people, how some break, how others endure, how thin the veneer of civilization truly is." He blinked at me, uncomprehending. "The Munitorum's psychiatrists will want to evaluate you," he said at last. "Combat readiness protocol, standard procedure." Combat readiness. As if our only value lay in whether we could be fed back into the grinder. Perhaps, in the cold calculus of the Imperium, that was true. Yet I could not shake the conviction that what we had endured meant more. The orcs had sought to strip us down, reduce us to beasts for their entertainment, and yes, some had broken, some had betrayed, but others had resisted. Others had clung to dignity, to the faint ember of humanity that no cage or arena could fully smother. That ember was the difference, the thing worth fighting for. Not just survival, but meaning. Some had indeed been reduced, shriven down to whatever shape survival demanded. Others found different paths, small resistances, private acts of mercy that kept a spark of humanity alive against all odds. They put me in temporary quarters aboard the Navy vessel, a luxury after months in a metal cage. Clean bedding, private wash facilities, food that actually tasted like food. The little comforts I'd once taken for granted were now blessings I received with near religious gratitude. Sleep, however, would not come. When I shut my eyes, the feeding pits returned. The sand, the faces that had not survived, the orc crowd's roar, the human screams, the scramble for rotting meat. Those images would fade only slowly. They were stitched into me now. On the third day out of system, I sought Major Ven in the ship's training room. She moved through a disciplined drill, her mechanical arm now serviced by proper tech priests rather than Grotto's crude tinkering. She looked up as I entered. "Commissar," she said, "medical reports say you declined augment replacements for the damaged tissue." I touched the scar along my jaw, the tyrannid's souvenir. Some marks, I thought, should remain visible. Reminders. "And your plans, once we're back?" she asked. Would I resume my commissarial duties? The question had circled my thoughts since extraction. The commissariat would expect my return. My file would read as commendation. A man who survived, organized a breakout, delivered intelligence. The institution would want me back at the front. "I'm not certain the commissariat is where I can best serve," I said slowly, feeling the idea coalesce as I spoke. "My experience here, how men behave under extreme degradation, how the enemy adapts, might be best used in special operations or intelligence analysis." A faint smile touched her lips. A commissar questioning his ordained path, another change wrought by hardship. "Not that the role is unimportant," I added quickly, "but perhaps my suitability has changed." "The Imperium needs symbols of authority," she said, "and enforcers of discipline. It also needs people who understand what lies beneath those symbols, the reality of men and the true nature of the foe." "You believe I possess that understanding?" I asked. "Not complete certainty," she answered after a beat, "but a perspective few have." The orcs had forced us into roles, performers in a theater of cruelty, and in doing so had exposed hard truths about human nature, resilience and adaptation, the things that remain when everything else is stripped away. "And what remains?" she asked, watching me closely as she paused her exercise. "Choice," I said. "Even when reduced to the bare struggle to live, we retain the ability to choose how we respond, to fight with dignity or surrender to baser instinct, to help others or look only to survive, to keep our humanity or become the beasts the orcs demanded." She nodded slowly. "A lesson worth learning, even at such cost." "Worth sharing as well," I said, "which is why I've begun writing, not only on the war boss's tactics, but on the psychological terrain of captivity, methods of resistance, patterns of survival, information that might save others." She frowned at that. "The commissariat won't like the emphasis on nuance. They prefer doctrine tidy and untroubled." "Then perhaps my future lies elsewhere," I replied. "Ordo Xenos might value it, or a training post, teaching troops how to resist capture and degradation." We kept talking as the ship folded through the warp, plans sketched in broad strokes, contingencies discussed, possibilities considered. Around us, the survivors moved between hope and exhaustion. The world we'd left behind was small now, a scar on a map, but what we carried away from it might yet be useful to men who had not been broken. The future is uncertain. The scars of captivity are still raw, the memories still sharp. Yet uncertainty feels truer than the rigid certainties I once clung to, doctrines that shattered in the face of real suffering. I am Jan Kreil. Once, I bore the mantle of commissar in the Imperial Guard. I have been paraded as entertainment before aliens, forced to fight in their arenas, chained in their prisons. I have killed, and I have refused to kill. I have compromised, and I have stood unyielding. I have lost faith, and I have found new purpose. I am altered, marked in ways both visible and hidden, but I am not broken. I am no longer a performer reciting lines in someone else's theater, whether staged by man or xenos. The orcs sought to strip us bare, to reduce us to beasts in their spectacle of cruelty. They succeeded with many, but not with me. My humanity remains scarred, but intact, a foundation on which to build whatever comes next. The lesson of that prison was not merely that men can be reduced to animals, though I saw it happen often enough. The greater truth is that even in the most degrading conditions, the power to remain human endures. It is the harder path, the more painful one, but it is the path I now choose. For what separates us from the alien, the heretic, the mutant, is not our flesh, nor even our faith in the Emperor, vital though that faith may be. It is our capacity to choose To choose compassion over cruelty, dignity over degradation, humanity over barbarity, even when civilization itself has been stripped away. That is the final lesson of the orc prison. That is what I will carry into the endless war. Not survival at any cost, but survival with purpose, with meaning, with humanity intact. The Emperor protects, or so we are taught. But when his hand does not reach us, when we are alone in the dark, it is not his will that defines us. It is our choices. And in the end, it is only our choices that may save us.